There was no great plan to become a journalist. It was very natural. I come from a generation that was, the older generation in my family was deeply involved in the freedom struggle. And the freedom struggle was closely linked to journalism. So it was a very natural transition. But what happened was I finished my post-graduation in history, that's right. After I finished the MA, I was doing my MPhil PhD, joint program MPhil PhD. At the same time, I started working in United News of India. So to be able to do both, I used to do my MPhil PhD in the morning, in the daytime, and I used to work at UNI as far as possible, as far as they would allow, on what was called the graveyard shift. Or a graveyard shift is 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. So I used to work on that. And then I used to, but the graveyard shift problem was that in Delhi there was no proper transportation. So to be at UNI by 3 a.m. in the morning, you had to take a bus at 9 p.m. After 10 p.m. there were no buses really. And then I would work the whole, in fact I would do some work studying in the UNI office until 3 a.m. or 2:30 a.m. If the night shift guys were there, we would finish as much work as possible so that by 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I would have very little to do. And but generally graveyard shift can be heavy because people keep a lot of traffic for that hour since the rest of the evening is too heavy. Second thing is that the time difference between India and the West. So it's that 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. shift. Lots of things are happening in United States, in Europe. So the news agency copy would come in at that time. While I was doing this and I was doing the MPhil PhD, after a while I found that I was more interested in this. It was more alive. And not that I consider that there's no contradiction. I think my history background helps me a lot in journalism. It is a very useful thing. You see, the kind of study, it depends on the kind of journalism, on the kind of history you study. In JNU, we studied socio-economic history. We studied about land relations. We studied about colonialism. We studied about forests. So, when I go and see the Mudavans, I have a background in my head. What happened to them in the colonial rule, the loss of the forest, land relations. I know what Kerala's land relations were before 1956. So that is a very useful thing. To have that in your head, that is extremely useful. Otherwise, you'll have to learn it from scratch. But if you have a background of land relations, you know the history of land reform, you know the tenurial relations, you know the landlord-peasant relations, you know what colonialism laws changed land holdings, you know the average land. This comes from studying history in a particular way. I consider that to this day, I get great value out of my study of history. First, I was in United News of India, Delhi. I joined there in September 1980. Then I moved to UNI Mumbai. I transferred to UNI Mumbai. While I was working in UNI Mumbai, I freelanced a couple of times for Blitz and the Daily. Then Mr. R.K. Karanjia, who was the editor-in-chief and the owner of the paper, called and asked me to join. And I did, because I could write. I was a sub-editor in UNI. I went to Blitz as a senior deputy editor, and within 3 months in a few months' time I was deputy chief editor of the group. I think some of the happiest days of my life were spent in that office. See, Mr. Karanjia was extremely creative, alive, and he was willing to try anything. So, if you went to him today, you go to senior management with a story, you are begging, pleading, not with Karanjay. If he saw that it's a good story, he would start thinking, okay, what is the headline? He won't argue with you, what is this? If he thought it's a bad story, he'd say it's useless. But if it was a good story, if he thought it was a good story, you would be working on the story on the pages in the next few minutes. Very quick to respond, very quick. Either way, he would respond very quickly. Second, he was 3 times my age. But he was more energetic than me. I think I was 24, he was 72. His was a family-owned paper. He owned the paper. And he treated the staff like an extension of the family. So as a patriarch, as father, he had the right to shout at you, yell at you, but you also had the right to argue and shout. That was R.K. Karanjay. I did rural reporting even earlier. While I was in Blitz, I had started reporting on drought and water crisis and going to the countryside. From 93 April, May, I did it full time. I mean, you can say that I became a full-time rural reporter in 1993. Always interested me. I'm saying, even in history, even in my studying of history, it was rural India that interested me. One simple fact of life is that 70% of your population is there. Second, it's a very complex and fascinating place. Third, it is very poorly represented in the media. Fourth, even in history, when we say freedom struggle, people think of Gandhi, Nehru. The great battles for freedom were fought in rural India. Whether the uprisings of Veerapandya Kattabomman or Veer Narayan Singh or Alluri Sita Ramaraju or the Gaddar party in Punjab, all these battles were rural battles. If not for rural Indians, you might have still been a British colony. It was they who overturned the Raj, the peasantry, in gigantic numbers. So it's always been a matter of fascination for me. And it's astonishing that, see, I call rural India a continent within a subcontinent. With 780 languages, 833 million people. But it is hardly ever represented in the media. One is, see, to be honest, the Magsaysay Award, I didn't know what time they announced it, but I knew it was coming because they had informed us some 10-20 days before, and then you are asked to keep it confidential. So when exactly it would be announced on July 31st or August 1st, I knew vaguely, but I didn't know when or what time because I was in Vidarbha. At that time I was in Vidarbha when the announcement came. But I knew of the award that it would come to me, that because they had informed us a little earlier. They seek confidentiality and I kept quiet about it. But when I started getting phone calls on July 31st and August 1st, then I knew it had been announced in the Philippines. Because people who heard it or saw it on the news agency, they started calling me. That's when I knew it had been formally announced. I don't think journalists should take awards from governments they are covering. A filmmaker doing a documentary for government, that's fine. That is a straight commercial arrangement. They are giving him a payment, he is delivering a product. Okay? That is fine. I don't think journalists should accept awards from governments whom they are covering every day. Like I cover the government of India and its economic policies. Suppose you were investing in a company. What do? You read the auditor's reports of the company. Then you'll see external auditor has made remarks about the financial health of the company. After reading the auditor's reports, you feel confident whether to invest or not to invest in that company. Right? Suppose you found out that the auditor was getting prices from the company, you would be disillusioned.
Yes.
Then you would not be able to trust the audit report. A journalist is an external auditor to government. I am not insisting that everybody follow my rule. This is my perception. It is my subjective perception. There are others whom I respect who have accepted. Maybe if you are past retirement and all that, that's fine. But if you are daily covering the government of India, I think it's a problem. So I see the journalist as an external auditor to government. And if auditor does not accept prices from the people whose accounts he is scrutinizing. Okay. So therefore I said no. I think it does not add to me. I think it undermines my credibility to be seen as someone whom the government is favoring. I do not think I made a mistake. I think that turning the award down was not an issue of I like this government, I don't like that government. It's not like that. It's that I think it is in principle not a good thing for a journalist to accept awards from his government. There are some awards which are autonomous, meaning government may have a role in them which are autonomous, or that's okay. But these supposed national honors, I don't think that's okay. I have not accepted an award from an Indian government, whether state or center, that I write about, that I cover. I think it will be disastrous. As it is, 3 monopolies, giant monopolies are forming in India. One is Ambani's, who now control Network 18 and all that it has. What you people see, as ETV, Malayalam, is owned by Mukesh Ambani. It's not owned by Ramoji Rao, it's not owned by Inadu. Except for Telugu channels, all the others are owned by Mukesh. After a while, the name will also change because Ramoji Rao sold the channel, but he did not sell the name. In a year and a half, the name will revert to Ramoji Rao, and this will be known as Network 18 Malayalam or something like that. That's what it will be called. So that one huge behemoth has emerged. Then comes Rupert Murdoch, all the Star TV channels and God knows what else he owns. Then comes Bennett Coleman and Co Limited, Times of India. Okay, so these 3 groups are the biggest. In India there are 10, 12 large groups, but these are giants. And so that process of monopoly concentration has been happening very fast. Many papers have collapsed and publications are in trouble, etc. And already in the last few years, thousands of journalists have lost their jobs. In Sarada scandal, chit fund scandal, 800 journalists lost their jobs in one day when Sarada collapsed. Because Sarada owned 1 or 2 newspapers and channels. Like that, the plight of the journalist is becoming very precarious and dangerous. So this is a huge problem. Second, right now there is still an Indian flavor to the media. When you allow 100%, giant companies from outside will buy into the media completely. When that happens, what is Indian, what is a flavor of Indian about the newspapers will disappear and become homogeneous. Suppose tomorrow you gave McDonald's 100% control over Indian food, what would all of us be eating? They will, Mean Moily will become McMean Moily and it will have mustard paste and tomato ketchup. That's what will happen. Initially it will look very impressive because their papers will look neater, they look cleaner, higher tech. But the content is another matter. It will completely. And with newspapers and magazines and journals and channels playing such an active role in Indian political life, that control you are handing over to giant corporations outside your country. As it is, they are playing that role already for Indian corporations. Now they'll be playing it for corporations outside the country. Even now they're doing it to some extent, but we will be legitimizing it. That kind of control. There will be very little Indian about the media after that. No, actually, the Indian press is doing much better than the American press. New York Times, Washington Post have been incurring severe declines in their revenues or straight losses. Washington Post has been sold to Jeffrey Bezos of Amazon. Today, Bezos owns the family that owned Washington Post for decades, no longer owns it. It wasn't getting revenues. Print media in India is doing much better than print media abroad. Okay, because for us, our literacy rates are only now growing steadily. And newspaper is a much cheaper thing in India. Even if you don't see, if you want to watch television, even if television is free, you must have the television hard set. Second, if you want cable television, you are paying so many hundreds of rupees a month. Newspaper, you are paying 2 rupees or a day. Sometimes, even that you will get huge discounts. So the idea that they are doing well and they will bring prosperity to Indian media, that's not true. They will bring in much more technology and create much more job displacement also. And we are doing much better than them in circulations. Our circulations are still going up for some newspapers, not all, but still going up. In fact, the print media in USA is in serious crisis. New York Times lost 45% of its revenues and took a loan from a Mexican billionaire, Carlos Slim. Okay. Washington Post lost so much money, it has been sold to Jeff Bezos. Very few papers are surviving or doing well. It's what we are also saying is that the newspaper industry is like any other industry. Food processing, cement. Why can't you let 100% FDI? That's a huge question. It's a very large problem. So it means a gigantic shift from the historic origins of the Indian press. The Indian press, much of the Indian press came into being to fight foreign capital, to fight imperialism, to fight foreign capital. It came as a response of Indian freedom. It came as a challenge to British imperialism. Today you are handing over that press to foreign capital. See, the thing is that you can't go back to the past. You can draw the lessons and principles and achievements of the past. You can also imitate its failures. I would say that there were always negative factors also in the Indian press. There was a large nationalist mainstream, but there were also the publications of the Hindu Mahasabha, the Muslim League and others, which were always very reactionary. But they were the minority compared. The biggest press, by the way, in India was the imperialist press. Times of India, British-owned papers, these were the giant ones. Nationalist press was small but more vigorous. By the 1920s, 30s, it was able to easily challenge. The debate was no longer if the British would go, but when the British would go. And there were huge fights. You have to look at, if we want to recapture the great legacy of Indian journalism and not the petty legacy, then we have to wonder what was that great legacy? The great legacy was that newspapers functioned not as a vehicle of, not essentially a stream of revenue, but as a stream of consciousness, as a stream of mobilization, as a means of communication with the masses, as a way of speaking, of giving voice to those who were voiceless, The paradox of the Indian press is this. In 100 years ago, a tiny Indian press, tiny, print orders of 5,000, 6,000. Gandhi, what was Gandhi's print order? A tiny press performed a gigantic social role. Okay? The names of journalists that come to my mind in this period are Baba Saheb Ambedkar, Gandhi, Tilak from a little earlier period. But these are the names of even Bhagat Singh, who wrote profusely letters to the editor, even from jail, under different names so he could get published. All this was based on seeing journalism as a social vehicle, as a societal conversation. They saw it as that, and therefore it achieved the things it did. If you say journalism is a business like any other business, you capture the glories of Mukesh Ambani. If you want to revive that, remember that was, you can't repeat it exactly because that was motivated by the freedom struggle. It was motivated by the freedom struggle. The first Indian owned publication which I remember was Miratul Akbar of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Before that there were other publications which didn't survive, and there was, all the others were British owned. The big papers, but not this. So the glories came from the fact that the journalists were also freedom fighters. It came from the fact that they were not driven by selfish personal motives, but by large social ideals and goals. That is what drove them. So if you want to recapture that, that is what must drive you. I'm saying that you cannot repeat it exactly, but you can certainly recapture the principles and the legacy and some of the achievements. There is no freedom struggle on today, so you will not get that kind of motivation, but you can certainly recapture those principles, that the interests of the public were greater than your own, that the situation of the masses was more important than your own. That kind of principle, if you recapture on a large scale, you will recapture the best of Indian journalism. Also, it is not true that there was no great Indian journalism after the freedom struggle, but the space, there was, but the space for it gets less and less and less and less and less. We need to expand the space. What we are trying to do today, see, the other difference was the pre-independence papers. Anyone who had a vision and 10 rupees started a newspaper. The owners, if the Hindu had 5 rupees, they borrowed 5 rupees, and they borrowed money and they started a newspaper on nothing. Now, you can no longer do that. Today, a newspaper is a multi-million-dollar business. So, only the corporate sector can afford it, or some super rich Croesus can afford it. Only the corporate sector. Even to start a small city paper, afternoon paper, costs tens of crores of rupees. And you must be prepared to lose money for 3 years before you break even in the advertising. Your dependence on the paper is not on the readers like their paper was, it is dependent on the advertiser. And print media is also entering a crisis all over the world because of the coming of digital media. So things are not the same, and you should try making them the same. But you try recapturing the idealism, the principles, the motivation, that you try recapturing. The legacy, that a newspaper was a society in conversation with itself. Well, I was the first to write about this on 82%, quoting ADR, 82% of Parliament being crore-patis. See, if 82% of your MPs are crore-patis, can they represent agricultural labor, which is the largest and poorest section of your society? Can they represent the small and marginal farmers who account for 83% of all farmers? Can they represent the people of Edamalakudi? Can 82% of crore-patis represent them? They can't. They can represent themselves. They came there, and you can see between 2009 and 2014, the percentage of crore-patis in parliament went up from 53% to 82%, which is astonishing. Second, the assets of second-term MPs, the assets of MPs coming back for a second term, went up by 300%, 700%. No stock exchange or industry in the world will give you that return. So you are increasing you are expanding an incredibly corrupt culture of the very richest owning democracy. That is one problem. But by the way, let me extend the same example to the media. If 82% of all MPs are crore-patis, 100% of media owners are crore-patis. What does it imply for the media? Can it be sensitive to Edmalkudi? There will be individuals. Even in the crore-patis, there will be individuals. That is what will happen. It will become less and representative democracy ceases to be representative and increasingly ceases to be democracy. Why don't we have 100% FDI in parliament? No, it's not functioning well. It will be very efficient. I think I'll write this. The Indian media is it's a establishment-driven media. There are always exceptions, but the dominant media is driven by establishment. So that time Manmohan Singh was doing what the corporate world wanted. From 1991, faithfully he served the corporate interests. Faithfully he served the ruling class interests. They loved him. From 2011, the crisis of the state was so great, he was unable to deliver all that they wanted. So then they turned on him. Now they're saying it's your NREGS that is causing the problem. It's your RTI that is causing the problem. It's your right to food. None of those came because of Manmohan Singh. They came because of other sections in the Congress party that demanded it. And for instance, there would have been no RTI and no NREGS in the 2004 parliament, but that time there were 63 left MPs. Today, who will force these guys to do anything? When there were 63 left MPs, a government that did not have a majority on its own could still pass some decent legislation. Mr. Manmohan Singh presided over that, but he was never a great votary or advocate of it. Today, it is not true that only Modi government is damaging NREGS. Mr. Chidambaram was doing the same when as finance minister. The amount of harm he did the NREGS, underfunding it, severely underfunding the NREGS, severely underfunding the food programs, all these guys will do it more aggressively and quicker. That's all. The Financial Times of London, I think, carried an estimate saying 4,300 crores was the BJP's, just BJP alone, 4,300 crores they spent, and most of that on projecting Mr. Modi. There is a fundamental lacuna in the Indian election rules. See, as the more the elections become expensive, the more Aam Aadmi and Aam Aurat are shut out of them. The thing is that what happens is that the lacuna in the Indian election rules, there are limits on what a candidate can spend, but there is no limit on what a party can spend. So every candidate can spend huge sums and say, no, that was on party expenditure, my party leader came here, party leader is a star campaigner, etc., all this kind of stuff.
It's not candidate expenditure.
Yeah, it's not the candidate. That's what Mr. Ashok Chavan has argued in the paid news case.
Right.
Okay? So that is a very gigantic problem. And unless you address it, it is going to get worse, and Indian elections cease to be one of mass value or participation. If only 82% can, if only crore-patis can get elected, that is a devastating shame. There is no Gujarat model, there is a Gujarat manner, which is crude, brutish, aggressive. Okay, what I'm saying is, what other states may be afraid to do with workers, and they will do ruthlessly and brutishly. There is no model. Are the economic policies of the state of Delhi and Maharashtra different from the economic policies of Gujarat? No. Are they governed by the same laws of economics? Are they governed by the same laws of customs and customs duties, excise duties, and are they using the same currency as the rest of the country? In which substantial issue does the economic policies of Gujarat differ from that of the country? There is a Gujarat manner, there is a Gujarat way, there is a Modi manner of doing things. Riding roughshod, your senior police officers are facing charges. Some of his senior police officers are facing charges of murder, encounter deaths. Another set of senior police officers are facing framed up cases because they opposed Modi. So I don't understand. What is this model? The Indian industry loves Mr. Modi because he gives them whatever they want. He doesn't care what the consequences are for the ordinary people. So Tata's Nano from Singur, they got 5,000, 6,000 crores of subsidy there in West Bengal. Then they moved to Gujarat and they get 29,000 crores. Tell me, how many nanos do you see on the street? I call it no. Public doesn't want it. Despite that, how did it become cheapest car? Because half the cost is borne by the public. So it's the cheap. If 50% of the cost is borne by the state subsidies, what is the big deal about it being cheap? You and I are paying for that car. Firstly, the BJP got 282 seats, or 31% of the vote. Okay. It got, Congress got 19%. Exactly the opposite happened in 2009. BJP got 19% of the vote. Did they say that Congress has a mandate to do whatever it wants? No. Did they say that they had no power at all because they got only 19%? No. They opposed the issues that they wanted to oppose. They did that. But they didn't oppose anything significant. They went with the government on everything. This 32% is actually 41-44% in the north, 40% in the north, and much less than 30% in the south. In Tamil Nadu, the BJP led 5 parties and got some 21% or so, 19 or 20%, 21% or less. When those 5 parties contested independently in 2009, they got more votes. In Andhra, they haven't got much. In Telangana, they haven't got much. In Karnataka, they were defeated by Siddaramaiah and the Congress. They do not have one MP from Kerala. Where is the mandate? They have a presence, just like the Congress has a presence. They have a majority. Claiming that that majority is a mandate to do whatever they did in Gujarat, that is ridiculous. Okay, that's simply not true. In fact, I think now it's time to think of proportional representation and voting. Like, even you keep your existing parliament but add 125 seats that are contested on a proportional representation basis. There is no mandate to do anything you want. See, I think that the Aam Aadmi Party occupied a space in Delhi that used to be occupied by the left parties. After Congress and BJP, the left parties had some base in the outlying areas of Delhi. They had a party, they had a base. The vacation of that space by the left created a vacuum which came to be occupied by the Aam Aadmi Party. But the Aam Aadmi Party had other characteristics which differentiated quite strongly from the left. One, the Aam Aadmi Party was very much a beneficiary of huge media attention. For 3 years or so, every panel discussion would have the different political parties, and Aam Aadmi Party's representative would be there as an independent voice. All this honeymoon continued till the day, as long as Aam Aadmi Party restricted its anti-corruption drive to Neta corruption, Babu corruption. The day the Aam Aadmi Party picked up the idea of corporate corruption, that day the media slaughtered them and never forgave them. The day they filed that FIR against Mukesh Ambani, from that day they were finished. The same media that, exalted them and valorized them and glorified them is now after them. It's either blacking. There are channels, by the way, that have given an order, no coverage of Aam Aadmi Party, and if there is, it will be negative. Then there are the internal contradictions. On the one hand, they picked up a base amongst ordinary Aam Aadmi, Aam Aurat in Delhi. They picked up a base, auto drivers, bus conductors, Juggi Jhopdi dwellers. Yeah. But they created a party on a very, very amorphous platform where Captain Gopinath and Meera Sanyal and a lot of corporate people are representing the party. There is a class contradiction there. You're appointing ideologues from the corporate world, but running on the votes of the Aam Aadmi. There are huge conflicts of interest between that class and this class. That will come. College professor is still a college professor, but Captain Gopinath is not a college professor. He is a billionaire. Meera Sanyal is head of Royal Scottish Bank, before that with some other bank, Standard Chartered. Now, again, this is the same issue of 82% crorepati's deciding what is good for agricultural laborers and things. So they never had a coherent ideological platform, and they suffered and paid the price for it. And they also misread. Interest in Delhi did not translate into interest across the country. Had they contested 60 seats concentrated, I think they would have done much better. They contested 430 odd seats, more than 400 seats, definitely more than 400, which is more than the number of seats BJP contested. So the Aam Aadmi Party has suffered a serious setback, overestimation. Now they are trying to regroup. I wish them well. They are trying to regroup and contest properly in Delhi, focus on Delhi. I think they will not do badly in Delhi. They could do well. But they also made a serious, severe mistake in resigning the way they did. They should have brought a radical budget to Parliament, to Assembly. If Congress and BJP jointly voted against the budget, then government would have fallen. It would have fallen on a good cause. Once you are defeated on a finance bill, government resigns. That is the practice. So that is the convention. A government defeated on a finance bill resigns. So had they been defeated by Congress, BJP, they could have gone to the masses. But they resigned, and how will you go to the masses and say I resign? And you didn't even consult your base. The left is in the process of a severe setback which they have not been able to overcome. I do not see them in the nearest future. I do not see them overcoming that. Less than, even in the more than immediate future, I see that it requires a giant rethinking and reorientation on their part to recapture that idealism of the youth which has always been with the left. That they have, I think also they have failed to orient themselves to the issues of new generations. Like for instance, environment. Or say in Kerala on the question of, on environmental issues, whether on the Western Ghats or on, there is confusion over some issues like on say Kudankulam. So on major issues that affect the public and the younger generation, they are caught on the wrong foot. They haven't been able to update and upgrade their approach. They still are the only force in the country that is able to represent the working class and the peasantry to any serious degree. No one else does. Not Aam Aadmi Party, nobody can do that. They are not even there in the peasantry. even that will come under pressure because they're unable to address a whole host of issues. What will be the vision of industrialization of the left in the new era? The period of giant smokestack factories, that's all gone. How do you now how do you redefine development in this new period? How do you approach the issue of environment in the new period? How do you take on the issues of how do you understand the nuclear issue in the new period after Fukushima? How do you understand these issues and what do you propose to do about them? What is your stand on industrialization of the kind that is being envisaged? There is no industry. I mean, there is a breakdown of industry. That they are unable to come up with and resolve. It is my serious and earnest hope that they do resolve it. I think it's going to be a very tough battle. Firstly, I don't think that there's anything wrong in making public your differences. And I have a different view from both. But I'm saying, if there are differences between these two, you say the two economic giants, I do not class them in the same category. I think Amartya Sen is a far superior intellectual, a far more democratic, less demagogic, and far more serious. He has a far greater commitment to ordinary people and their welfare. Professor Bhagwati is an establishment man in every cell of his body. Okay, Professor Bhagwati was one of those who who was behind the WTO. He was the special advisor to Arthur Duncan. Nowadays he criticizes the WTO and never mentions his role in drafting the monster that the WTO is today. Amartya Sen never did that. Dr. Bhagwati, I don't see I see very little of value in this great economics. He and this other chap, Panagaraya, they don't even know, they write books which are full of absolute absurdities. They don't know who an Indian farmer is. In their book, in one book where they've attacked me, which is fine. I'm very happy. They mentioned me and tried answering my points on the thing. I'm very pleased with that. I'm very pleased with that, but I don't consider them to be in the league of Amartya Sen. I have very strong differences with Professor Amartya Sen's views on many things. However, I hold him in the highest respect and I know where he's coming from. I know what his motivation is. He's not looking for governmental posts like Professor Panagaraya made clear that he was very interested. Right? He made very clear that they're very interested in being advisor. Amartya Sen is not like that. He's not thinking about what he can achieve personally. He's thinking about what is good for the Indian people, what is good for. He's far more, his line of thinking is about welfare, poor people, hunger, public action, expression, freedom, liberties. These are his issues. On that, I am all admiration and respect. Professor Bhagwati and Panagaraya are really a people who represent the corporate world's, capture the world and exhaust the resources view. In their book they wrote, in one of their books they wrote that Sainath has said this about farmers' suicides. Actually, farmers' suicides are very low. Because you should see the number of farmers. Farmers are 53% of the population. Therefore, farmers, first of all, it means these are a pair of clowns who don't know who is a farmer in India. These are great, eminent economists, dons, dons of universities who have no idea. Let me say it on record. You're a pair of clowns if you don't even know who an Indian farmer is. Indian farmers are not 53% of the population. They are less than 8% of the population, full-time farmers. That is, main worker, cultivator. Cultivate, in the census it will be written MARG-cultivator. That means marginal cultivator. Even if you work for 10 days, you will be a marginal cultivator. That's why the census makes main worker someone who has done that work for at least 6 months in the year. Now, if you have worked 6 months or more in the year on cultivation, you are a farmer, you are dependent on farming for it. But if you have worked 10 days, 20 days, marginal cultivators I can include corporate executives who grow grapes on their weekend country house. Okay. Now, the percentage of Indian farmers has been declining rapidly. Between 91 and 2011, we have 15 million fewer full-time farmers.
15 million.
That is, every day you are losing 2,000. Because they are giving up farming, they are becoming agricultural laborers, they are losing their land. In my home state of Andhra Pradesh, number of farmers in the last decade, 2001 to 2011 census, declined by 1.3 million. But the number of agricultural laborers went up by 3.4 million. It suggests that a lot of formerly full-time farmers have fallen into the ranks of the agrarian underclass. Now, so the full-time farmers figures have been declining rapidly. When you are living in Kerala, where there have been a lot of farmer suicides, when the farmer commits suicide, the authorities check, is the person who has committed suicide, was he a farmer? What is the criteria they'll use? Is his name on the patta? Correct? If his name is not on the patta, it will not be called farmer suicide. Correct?
Yes.
It will not be called. So, only that full-time farmer, they will check whether he was operating the land, whether he patta. There are, thousands of tenant farmers who have committed suicide who have not been counted
As a farmer.
because their name is not on the patta. Their name is not on the patta. Now the point is this: if you are so ignorant, you do not know the difference between a farmer and those engaged in agriculture. Let me give you an example so that these people who obviously know nothing about farmers and farming and agricultural laborers, they should understand. In agriculture, 53% of the population is engaged with agriculture, but not everybody of them is a farmer. Not every one of them is a farmer at all, full-time or half-time. Everybody in Bollywood is not an actor. Correct? Actors are the smallest percentage and heroes are the smallest percentage within the smallest percentage. Everybody in Bollywood is not an actor. Right? There are light boys, there are clapper boys.
Dancer.
Bhagwati and Panagri are clapper boys for the corporate world. In Bollywood there are light boys, there are extras. There are all. Actors are a very small proportion. But the number of people engaged in Bollywood is much larger than actors. People engaged in agriculture may be 50, 52, 53%. They're not all farmers. You understand? Everybody in the education sector is not a student. Nor is everybody in the education sector a teacher. When you go to your campus, how many people are there working in that? Officers, administration, staff, janitor, sports, physical trainers, hostel warden, managers, then all those who are involved in, say, publication, textbooks, notebooks, stationery, storekeepers, inventory, all these are in the education sector. So this is a silly and I find it humiliating that a pair of people with such great claims to eminence as economists do not know this fundamental. So, these are supposed to be the great dons of Columbia economics, but Don Bhagwati and Sancho Panagria, they believe that there are 53% of the population are farmers. And that they believe that the suicides are calculated on that 53%. It's not so. It's calculated on that 8% who have pattas, and even some of them may not have their names on the pattas, for all I know. Yeah. They don't have money to fund the NREGS, but the amount of money they have given off in these concessions, 5.32 lakh crores, that would fund the NREGS for some 30 years, 31 years. By the way, the statement of revenue foregone is for the previous year. That means previous government. We'll see what they'll do this year. So the NREGS, if you take that 36.15 lakh crores, if you take that, you can fund the NREGS for 105 years. Lifetime of 2 agricultural laborers. 2 lifetimes of an agricultural laborer. Okay, if he was reborn, he can again do the as an agricultural laborer. You can support him fully on that. So you can do all of that without much of a great problem. The money is there. It is simply not for the poor. The food security bill. What did it cost you this year? What are you spending on gold, diamonds and jewelry? In 36 months we have written off 1,67,000 crores. You see how many years you can run your food security on that amount. The money is there. If simply there is no need for CSR and charity, the rich simply should pay their taxes. And there have to be taxes on. In this country, you pay, if you are saving and making on FD, you can pay 30% tax on that. As a salaried employee also, you can pay 20-30% tax. But you don't pay much tax on dividends in investments in the market. So that is much less in fact, and in some instances waived also. So it's not as if there is no money. You are taxing the poor to pay the rich. That's where the resource transfer is taking place. The amount of money written off, in the last few years, the amount of money written off in the statement of revenue foregone has tended to be larger than the budget deficit. You'd have a surplus budget if you recovered this money. Meaning you'd have a break-even budget. Last year it was 8,000 crores more than the deficit. So you would have had a minor surplus. You could have claimed. See, one thing, you should not take the farm suicides as the only measure of the crisis. The farm suicides are the manifestation of the agrarian crisis. They are the consequence of the agrarian crisis, not the cause. The farm suicides are the consequence of the agrarian crisis, not the cause. They are the outcome of the agrarian crisis, not the origin. The agrarian crisis is much larger than the suicides. The suicides are the tragic face of the crisis. There are millions of farmers, tens of millions of farmers who have not committed suicide, whose condition is also pathetic. Are they less badly off than the person who committed suicide? Not till the point of suicide. Okay. After that, that person's family will go even further down because the breadwinner is gone. But that is the problem. The conditions that led to the suicides, those don't change dramatically, then how will things change? How will things change if those conditions don't change? There have been some changes, and in some places some improvement as a result of those changes. Like there's been an improvement in giving compensation to families. There's been an improvement in some regions, better credit facilities. Nationally, no. The credit issue still remains a burning issue. Debt remains a burning issue. Rising price of input costs remains a burning issue. Water stress and water scarcity, water crisis remains a burning issue. The export rules and duties and customs on cotton, for instance, remains an incredibly difficult and dangerous issue. A lot of, in Kerala, the free trade agreements are killing Kerala's pepper and, coffee and other cash crop products. All these are policy driven. So long as they are policy driven, your entire drive in agriculture is towards corporate agriculture. The agrarian crisis in 5 words, the drive towards corporatization of agriculture or the corporate takeover of Indian agriculture. That is your agrarian crisis. The means by which it is achieved is predatory commercialization of the countryside. 5 words. The consequence is largest displacement in Indian history. Not necessarily achieved with tanks and guns and bulldozers, but simply by making your life so miserable that you quit farming and go somewhere else and let me take over your land, or I take it for an SEZ or some pharma company, or that's the situation. The GEAC has been told it can go ahead with some of these trials. There is resistance, even within the BJP there is resistance, but the Supreme Court's technical expert committee, the Supreme Court had appointed some of the best experts in the country on this issue, and they had said, do not permit trials. Lot more research and conditions and safeguards have to be in place. They suggested a moratorium on trials. This government is pushing those trials. But the then Environment Minister Jairam Ramesh opposed it. Basically, but also many others opposed it, and the government was fought by non-governmental individuals. Like Aruna Rodriguez, petitioner, took the case to the Supreme Court. Then they appointed the Supreme Court Technical Experts Committee. And that committee ruled in favor of what Ms. Rodriguez had argued. And they said that this is very dangerous to unleash trials without the proper field conditions, without the proper safeguards, without extensive pre-field testing and research. And the devastation is, once it takes over, your diversity is gone. You can't restore all the cotton varieties that have disappeared. And likewise, all your vegetables, unique vegetables of Kerala, they'll all go. Once you get into food crop, that is the most dangerous move, to allow GM to come into food crop. The Indian media are the most exclusionist institution of Indian democracy. The worst government has representation. The best media do not have it. It is they can't find Dalits. You see, we could find a Dalit to be Chief Justice of India. We could find Dalits to be President of India. We can find Dalit governors, vice chancellors, but they are not fit to be chief sub-editors also. This is the casteism of embedded in the Indian media. There is near total exclusion of both Dalits and Adivasis. How is it that Dalits can rise to the level of President of India, but inside a newspaper office can't go beyond chief sub-editor? Even that is a big achievement. Yeah? So it's not that they lack the ability. It's that we lack the inclusiveness. The media is exclusionist. And that's why the media is also so reactionary on issues of quotas, reservations. Always the media are extremely reactionary. When the AIMS students went on their ridiculous protest, the entire media was backing them. So we are within the institutions of Indian democracy, we are the most exclusionist. No amount of shouting, screaming and protesting will conceal this reality. I think Kudumbashree is something beyond empowering women. It empowers women greatly, but it goes far beyond that also. I think it is the greatest movement of food security, food justice and gender justice. So it's not just about giving people a few skills and they learn something more. I think it has transformed a lot in I would say without hesitation, that after the land reform movements, which were more historic, greater lasting impressions and greater lasting influence, apart from the land reform movements, this is the most significant movement I have seen in terms of its potential, promise and performance. Secondly, even the land reform movements, and I am the greatest supporter of land reform, earlier they lacked the gender justice element. Kudumbashree brings that element. I would like to see this movement meld with land reform agitations and land reform movements. I would like to see that energies, the marrying of those energies. Kudumbashree has opened a public space for the voice and presence of women who previously were completely secondary members of their own families. Now it's not about earning an additional supplementary income. These are independent earners. I think several historic walls have been breached. Several historic obstacles have been overcome or are being overcome. They've not all been overcome. There are many huge, dangerous and difficult challenges before Kudumbashree. It may not pass all of them, but the kind of confidence it has given the women. You were together with me in Edamalakudi. When we spoke to the women of Edamalakudi, I think one of the most important things they said was, I asked them, if you remember, do you see yourselves as laborers or as producers? Every single one of them said she saw herself as a producer and that she wanted that respect to be seen as a producer. How can you ever measure the importance of that mental shift? Some days ago in August 1, I was speaking, doing a keynote address at the All India Agricultural Workers Union National Conference in Warangal, Telangana. There also every agricultural worker was saying, making the point about agricultural workers is that we should not remain agricultural workers. We should become owners. We should become producers. That these women have already made the mental psychological shift. The achievements of Kudumbashree cannot be counted in output, number of acres or how many kilograms or tons of production. How will you calculate or capture the importance of the change in the intra-family dynamics? That the woman is now given much more respect by her own children, they have told us. They see us differently when we are producers, by their own husbands, who are now being forced to accept that this is not a supplementary income, it is an independent income. That is a very substantial and important part of what happens. It hasn't changed the society around them all that substantially, but it has changed the women. The next step is for it to affect society as a whole more. I think it has even in society it's had some impact, not as much as I would like to see, but the impact on the women, opening up of the public space, becoming independent earners, changing the intra-family dynamics, seeing themselves as producers rather than laborers. I think Kudumbashree is an absolutely historic development. Which other movement in the country today has 12% of the population as members? Kerala's population is 33.4 million. Kudumbashree membership is 4.1 million. That means 12% of all Keralites are members of Kudumbashree. Female population is 17 million. Kudumbashree population is 4.1 million. That means 1 in every 4 or more than 1 in every 4 women is a Kudumbashree member. 50% plus of households are touched by Kudumbashree. That is a huge, huge figure. Okay. The other thing is that, it is not a PPP. I detest this concept of PPP, public-private partnership, in which it means private profits, public losses. But Kudumbashree is a PSP, public-state project. The initiative is coming from the women, support is coming from the state.
Both are important, and that is a much better model of social development than PPP. Okay. Here, the community is a beneficiary, not some individual capitalist. So that I think is also a very important thing. There are many things about Kudumbashree that are extraordinary. How does one measure the value of converting fallow lands to paddy lands in a country where food crop land has been falling dramatically, where farmers' crisis is mostly amongst the where the farm suicides are mostly amongst cash crop farmers. It gets worse when more and more cropland is converted to cash crop. Where governments and states have failed, the women of Kudumbashree have set up green armies and are converting fallow lands to paddy. They have made those areas green. Tell me, how does one calculate the importance? Can you, in monetary terms, calculate the significance of the return of migratory birds to those fields? Can one calculate that in money, in rupees and paisas?
No, we can't.
Yeah. So there are many things. These are some of the important things that Kudumbashree is doing, and it has captured the imagination of women. While, look at the media. The media have not given Kudumbashree the importance it deserves in Kerala, but global media has shown much more interest in Kudumbashree. Why is it that the media generally can't really appreciate? I'm not saying they haven't covered. They have covered, but poorly. The reason is manifold. One is, media needs individual heroes, and essentially it needs male heroes because the media are male dominated. So if they can't find, even in microfinance, when they covered microfinance, they had heroes. SKS Akula of SKS, Nachiket More of ICICI. Corporations also became heroes, ICICI. And the media covered microfinance like anything, as if it was the savior of the world. Today the microfinance sector is in collapse. They're in danger of serious default. I was always critical of that sector, saying you are extorting and exploiting these women with interest rates of 25%, 30%, 40%. Okay, and it will collapse, and it has. Now, but in Kudumbashree has grown. Okay, from a handful of women in 98 to 4.1 million now. More than half, half the households of Kerala are covered. So this is another incredible thing that has happened. Now, you see, even if they find a female hero, it has to be someone from the upper classes. Okay? Who is leading the poor heathen masses to liberation. That you can't find in Kudumbashree. Right? Can you find individual charismatic heroes and faces? You can't find it. The point about Kudumbashree is, and the point about the media is, in looking for that one hero, they are missing 4.1 million heroines. That is the point about Kudumbashree. So they are unable to, and then another reason is, the media are not interested because Kudumbashree has no advertising revenue. And Kudumbashree can't do paid news. So there is less interest. On television, there is no program about Kudumbashree, but there is a full-time program on CNBC on golf. Who plays golf in this country? A bunch of CEOs go and hang out with the anchor. There are push factors and pull factors, but the last 10 years have seen the highest migrations out of rural India. People are moving largely out of distress, their inability to earn, their inability to create, our inability to create employment where it is needed, the collapse of traditional occupations from neoliberal economic policies, onslaught. All these are pushing people out of not just states, but out of particular regions and states. In Bengal, many of them come from Malda. Right? You check how many of them are from Malda. And in Odisha, many of them will be from Kalandi, Bolangir, Koraput, that side. So there are specific classes and specific castes which are moving out of Odisha wherever they're coming from. So all these are factors. And because of the collapse of the countryside, the collapse of agriculture, you're seeing the largest ever migrations in our history. Because all allied occupations also collapse. If farmers go bankrupt, the carpenter starves. Nobody orders a new bullock cart, nobody orders retooling, nobody buys a new axe, and the carpenter starves. Because the carpenter in rural India gets his payment part in cash, 3/4, 2/3 in kind, grain, vegetables. So when the farmer is no longer doing that, because the farmer is bankrupt, then the carpenter starves. So all the allied occupations also go. That carpenter is somebody who is in the 53% that Don Bhagwati and Sancho Panagria count as farmers. They are engaged in the agriculture sector. I am a critic of neoliberal globalization. If you have a people's globalization, that is a different thing. The alternative is to find systems of existence other than capitalism. You can have more than one alternative. Not only is another world possible, other worlds are possible.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in my own understanding, you have a starting point for another kind of society in the directive principles of state policy in the Indian Constitution. The right to work, the right to health and nutrition, the right to food, the right to education. There are 5-6 rights in the directive principles which we should enforce as a bill of rights. You'll be living in a different society and a different world. That is a first step towards other alternatives. But it will be a society based far more on justice. The first paragraph of the Directive Principles chapter says, the state shall in particular strive to reduce, mitigate or eliminate inequality, social, political and economic. I'm saying it's there in your constitution. It can only be achieved by mass movements and mass struggles. There is no other way. How was land reform achieved? And that too, land reform has not been achieved in 95% of the states, only in 2-3 states. And even those states now have to take the reforms further. My message is that you should decide whether you want to be journalists or you want to be stenographers. The choice is between being a journalist and being a corporate stenographer. 85% of what we call journalism today, the overwhelming share of what we call journalism today is stenography. It reflects what the corporate world wants or how it sees the world. So my thing is, please choose to be journalists, not stenographers. I've been doing 22 years almost of full-time rural journalism. Rural India is the most fascinating part of the planet. It is a continent within a subcontinent with 780 languages and 833 million people, 7 languages which are spoken by more than 50 million, 4 languages which are spoken by more than 80 million, 1 language which is spoken by more than 500 million, and some languages which are spoken by 4 people, like Saimor in Tripura. And other languages which are spoken by 2,000, 3,000, like Bonda in Koraput and Malkangiri. So the point is that it is an incredibly, and it is also caught in the midst of a brutal transformation. I think we are losing that magic. At the same time, there is also some ugliness about rural India. Caste, untouchability, atrocities, feudalism, gender oppression, all these. I'm saying that as an honest journalist, we capture both. The magic and the beauty and the ugliness. The tragedy in our time is that the magic and the beauty are dying, the ugliness is growing. Yeah. The People's Archive of Rural India wants to do a journalism that is different from that of the mainstream media. The journalism of People's Archive in one line, the everyday lives of everyday people.